Hello friends, welcome back to another Bridgerton video. This time, I'm going to tell you the story of Hyacinth Bridgerton and Gareth St. Clair. Remember that these videos are based on the books of the Bridgerton saga by author Julia Quinn. But before we start, remember that in the description, I left my Amazon affiliate link where you can get 30 days free unlimited audiobooks on Audible or 90 days free if you have Amazon Prime. On Audible, you can find popular books like Fourth Wing, The Cruel Prince, A Court of Thorns and Roses, and many more. So there you have it. 1815, 10 years before the events of this book begin. Gareth had never got on well with his father. Their relationship, far from being that of father and son, was rather diplomatic. They never conversed, unless absolutely necessary, and his father had made his indifference to him, his youngest son, more than clear. His mother had died in an accident when he was only 5, so his memories of her were vague. However, Gareth had grown accustomed to being the disappointment of his father, who only looked out for him monetarily, because that was what was expected of a father. That day, he had summoned him to his office to let him know that he would have to get married, and not only that, but he had chosen the lucky girl himself. Gareth almost fainted. He was only 18 and just finishing his studies at Eton. How was he supposed to get married? His father then explained that he had to, as they were on the verge of bankruptcy and needed the dowry that Mary Winshap's parents offered to anyone who would marry her. Mary was dumb. Let's put it more nicely. She wasn't exactly a smart girl. Gareth had known her since they were little, but as she grew older, it became more and more obvious that something was wrong, as she continued to behave as if she hadn't grown up at all. It was more than obvious that you couldn't get into a relationship with a girl like that. He couldn't marry her. No way. So he refused. He flatly refused. Why did he have to marry? Why couldn't George, his older brother, take on that responsibility? Gareth didn't understand, but for his father, it was more than clear. He would never put George in that situation, because he was his only son and Gareth was just a bastard. And it wasn't until that moment that he found out, from the man he had believed all his life to be his father. 10 years later, 1825. Hyacinth was, as she was every year, at the Smiths' annual soiree. She was accompanied by Penelope Federington, who had married her brother Colin a year before, and Lady Danbury, with whom Hyacinth used to meet every Tuesday to read romance novels. Hyacinth, who was by then 22 years old, had been presenting herself in society for 3 years and had yet to find a husband, despite having received at least 4 marriage proposals. She was the only Bridgerton sister who had not yet married, apart from Gregory, who was 24, an acceptable age in society for a man to remain unmarried. On that day, Lady Danbury's grandson, Gareth, who, though of marriageable age, seemed to be in complete denial about the idea of marriage, was to go. It was common knowledge that he had a bad relationship with his father, and his older brother had died a year before without leaving any descendants, so the title of lord had fallen to the boy, so his grandmother took great pains to manipulate him into attending balls in search of a wife. Gareth and Hyacinth had shared no more than a few words and glances at the occasional party to which Lady Danbury had dragged the boy. He was a rather handsome 28-year-old man by all accounts, with his hair somewhere between blonde and brown, and tall enough to be pulled into a ponytail. Tall and slim, and with hauntingly blue eyes, as Hyacinth used to describe them. Gareth tended to attract the attention of all young women of marriageable age, though it was well known that he preferred bachelorhood and the arms of opera singers. That night, Gareth had reluctantly introduced himself, taking a seat between Lady Danbury and Hyacinth. He had always seen Hyacinth as a woman unlike any other. He admired her for her cunning and wit, which was hard to come by in any other woman at the time. To others, she was a catch. She was the youngest of the Bridgertons, a prominent and wealthy family, and her older brother, Anthony Bridgerton, had increased her dowry. But when Gareth asked his friends about Hyacinth, they all agreed that he was mad if he wanted to marry her, although he only asked because of the girl's relationship with his grandmother. Men don't like women who are smarter than them, one of his friends told him, Gareth had always thought of Hyacinth as the only person capable of standing up to his intrepid grandmother, for they were so alike and always had the last word. After Gareth had refused to marry, his father, or rather Lord St. Clair, had thrown him out on his ear, so the boy had turned to Lady Danbury, his mother's mother. The old lady was unaware of Gareth's illegitimacy, and he had not bothered to tell her, preferring not to tarnish his mother's name by revealing to his grandmother that her youngest daughter had committed adultery during her marriage. That night, he teased her more than once, challenging her and leaving her speechless, though it was difficult, and somehow they could not help but feel that they were playing with fire. 3 days later, Gareth received his late brother's wife. She handed him his paternal grandmother's diary, who, remember, was not really his blood family. It was a brown leather-bound notebook, handwritten in Italian, a language Gareth was not fluent in, so he decided to take it to Grandma Danbury, who would surely help him decipher its contents. Meanwhile, Lady Danbury and Hyacinth had their afternoon reading. The old lady was trying to convince the girl that Gareth might be a good match for her when the aforementioned appeared on the scene. He had the diary with him, which ended up in the hands of Hyacinth, who had been taking Italian lessons, although she was not very good at it. They decided that she would translate the first few pages of the diary and give him an answer the next day, when they met at a poetry recital that Lady Danbury had engaged her grandson to give. Later, Hyacinth turned up at her home where she met her mother. Violet Bridgerton had acted as matchmaker for her 6 eldest children, who were now happily married and in love, but Hyacinth seemed to be getting out of hand. When he saw her coming home from her weekly visit to Lady Danbury, he insisted that she must marry. She wanted her daughter to be happy, like her other children, but she would not find love unless she looked for it. She even suggested Gareth St. Clair as a possible husband, but Hyacinth thought the boy did not really like her, as he did nothing but challenge her. Besides, he had a reputation as a libertine, and she certainly didn't want that in a husband. Irritated, Violet asked her daughter why she hadn't married yet. Hyacinth then asked herself if she really wanted to get married, and the answer was yes, she did, more than she liked to admit, but she had not found anyone she wanted to marry. Violet explained to her that there were indeed men out there worthy of her love. Hyacinth was a rebellious woman, a free soul, and she needed an equal, someone who could stand up to her. The problem was that every time she met one, she chased him away. Hyacinth had been her last child, the one she had had to bring into the world alone after Edmund's death. For the one who had had to be everything, mother and father, and yet had been different, Violet would describe her as a force of nature, free and confident. Yet she could see her daughter shying away from what she felt would be difficult or challenging for her, and so it seemed to be with love. The next day, Hyacinth found herself sitting next to Gareth St. Clair. She had been thinking about her last conversation with her mother, and if she was honest with herself, she had to admit that she had met a few men in the past who had managed to make her so nervous that she stammered, so she had run away from them, claiming that she didn't like them, when in fact, she was beginning to think that she didn't like herself when she was with them. Gareth, sitting next to her with an expression that was both bored and amused, had everything she was looking for in a man. Handsome, smart, funny, cunning. No, Gareth definitely couldn't be her type of man. He was a libertine, and he'd been with a lot of women, the latest being Maria, the most famous soprano of the moment, a woman whose beauty Hyacinth doubted she could match. He could not compare with her physically, not to mention her prowess in bed, a subject on which Hyacinth had vague information gleaned from her older sisters. Her thoughts silenced, Hyacinth filled Gareth in on what little she had been able to decipher from the diary. His grandmother, who would have been 17 at the time, wrote sadly of her future marriage to the boy's grandfather, arranged by their parents. This came as no surprise to Gareth, as he himself was on the verge of being tied down to a woman he did not love. Hyacinth promised to continue translating the notebook, and after that meeting, Gareth couldn't stop thinking about her, the smell of her perfume, her laughter, and everything she did. The next day, Hyacinth was at a dance organized by the Bridgertons, talking to Felicity Feederintong, her childhood best friend. She insisted that it would be a good idea for her to marry Gareth, as he seemed to be the only man who could cope with her friend's wild personality. Felicity had married Geoffrey, her current husband, last year and seemed to have a happy marriage, and although Hyacinth insisted that she didn't like Gareth, her friend realized that there was definitely something of a lie in that statement. While the two friends were debating, Gareth was across the room dancing with a lady when something interesting happened. Lord St. Clair appeared on the scene. This could never go well. Hyacinth had only seen the consequences of a father and son meeting at an event once before, and it had not gone well, so the girl thought that now that she was Gareth's friend, she should help him in some way. So, to her best friend's surprise, she approached the boy and asked him to dance. She entertained him by telling him a few other things she had managed to translate from her grandmother's diary. Like their arrival in London from Italy, and although Hyacinth was not a very good dancer, Gareth found himself enjoying her company and the brief stompings he received without her noticing that he had given them. When Hyacinth was sure that Lord St. Clair had left, she said goodbye to Gareth, but the boy decided to go to the toilet before leaving. It was there that he met his father. The man, of course, did not hesitate to reiterate his contempt for him, and for the fact that, although he hated him, he would now have to surrender his title because of the death of his only son. "George must be turning in his grave," the man said, and that was the last straw. In a second, Gareth found himself pressed against the bathroom wall. George was his brother and the only person he was ever sure he loved, apart from his grandmother Danbury, so he was not going to let his father talk about him like that. Her father then decided to mock the fact that Gareth was trying to woo Hyacinth, which he deduced from watching them dance, and delighted in assuring her that she would never accept him because he was not worthy enough to be with her, nor to be part of her family, the Bridgertons. He was nothing more than a bastard, a mongrel. "Who is your father?" the Lord asked his son, leaving him speechless. He had never broached the subject, and Gareth did not know the answer, but he did not miss the opportunity to taunt him about his mother's infidelity. Lord St. Clair, however, responded to the taunt by telling him that his real father had not loved him enough to give him his surname, and that he was probably a poor chimney sweep or a footman. He then withdrew, and in his place appeared Hyacinth, who had seen him leave and decided to see if Gareth was all right. The boy looked at her then and had to admit that he really did want her. He had known it for a while, but at that moment, he could not control himself and kissed her, and she let him kiss her, even though it was clearly the first time she had ever done so. But when she realized what she was doing, she did what Gareth never thought he would see her do. She ran away. Hyacinth lay in her room the next day. She had been thinking about the night before, about the kiss, and about Gareth's words when, realizing how inexperienced she was, he had asked her to kiss him back. No other man had ever tried to kiss her before, although she was not closed to it, but she had never imagined it would happen with Gareth St. Clair, who had so far shown no interest. She vaguely thought then that it was very likely that he had kissed her the way he had kissed every other woman who had crossed his path at the time, just to distract her from whatever had happened with her father a few minutes earlier. He decided to put the thought out of his mind and continue translating the journal. Gareth, for his part, had decided it would be best to go to the Bridgerton house and apologize to Hyacinth. He hadn't wanted to kiss her. I mean, yes, he had, but only since the moment he'd seen her after the argument with his father. He had never been involved with a single woman of marriageable age, and he had no intention of starting now. And it wasn't that he hadn't enjoyed the kiss, but he feared that Hyacinth was getting her hopes up for something that wasn't going to happen. But when the girl opened the door, she was more interested in her progress with the diary than in the accidental kiss of the night before. She then excitedly told him that her grandmother had confessed in her diary that she had hidden diamonds at St. Clair's house in London. She had never told her husband, so they were probably still hidden, although there was a possibility that Gareth's father had already found them. Hyacinth then announced that they should go and get them, as they could be the solution to the family debts that Gareth was about to inherit. At first he refused, but eventually gave in to her pleas and the argument that he needed her to translate and find the location of the jewels. So it was decided that they would sneak into the St. Clair house. A few days later, they found themselves in the dark of night, ready to slip into the house through a window. Gareth was aware of how dangerous the situation was, especially considering that if the Bridgertons found out he had kidnapped the only woman in the family in the middle of the night, they would have him before a priest in no time, and then there would be no turning back. Once inside, they searched Grandma St. Clair's office, where they rummaged through a cupboard and found a small note written in Italian, as if they were on a treasure hunt. And although they were almost trapped by the largest dome in the house, they managed to escape unscathed, albeit without the diamonds. Hyacinth couldn't get the previous night out of his head, but he managed to translate the note, which seemed to be written as a riddle, but as far as Hyacinth could tell, it had something to do with water. Maybe the diamonds were in a physics book? Shortly afterwards, he reached Gareth, and after tea with Hyacinth, Daphne, Violet, and Gregory, the latter trying to get on his sister's nerves by saying that Gareth was his special friend, they went for a walk in the park to discuss the translation of the note. Hyacinth told him about her theory on the location of the diamonds and that they might be in the library of St. Clair's house in some physics or biology book. They began to discuss her upcoming visit to the house. Gareth tried to persuade her not to go, but she kept insisting, saying that they could even take advantage of the fact that her family wanted to set her up with him, arguing that it might actually benefit them if they thought he was courting her, as they wouldn't ask any questions if they went out together. Hyacinth's attitude when talking about her family annoyed Gareth. She didn't value what she had. That much was clear. She had never had to go through the loneliness he had had to live with all his life, having only one person who loved him and who he loved enough to give his life for her. And that was his grandmother, and no one knew how much he wanted to have someone else to give his all for. This left Hyacinth speechless. She had undoubtedly behaved like a foolish child, but at the same time, it had opened her eyes to something she had refused to accept. Gareth was the one. She was going to marry this man. Not just because he was handsome, smart, and funny, but because he knew what was important. He knew the value of things, and that was worth far more than any title or fortune. She decided that she would win him over. She would do what she had to do to achieve her goal, but not at that moment, especially not when Gareth's father appeared on the scene, teasing the boy with words that sounded like disguised taunts and implicating her. At the end of this conversation, if it could be called that, Gareth seemed furious, but Hyacinth felt she should talk to him anyway. She told him that she was the only one of the Bridgertons who had never known her father, and that all her life she had longed to have one. But knowing Lord St. Clair, it was clear to her that she would rather have no father than one like him. She had memories of her father, at least the ones her brothers had told her, and she was sure that he was a good man, and that he would have loved her unreservedly despite everything, even if she thought herself difficult to love. He thought otherwise. He believed, no, he did not believe. He was sure that Hyacinth was an easy woman to love. She then began to list her faults and the reasons why she was difficult to love, which amused him, but he decided to shut her up and kiss her. That day, that brief conversation had been an awakening of his feelings. He wanted her with all his might, and he wanted Hyacinth to be his, but he had to put things right. So he said goodbye to her, leaving her in utter confusion, and wasted no time in making his way to Viscount Bridgerton's house to ask for her hand. "I want to marry Hyacinth," he said, but Anthony didn't answer, and then he cleared his throat, "if she accepts me." And then a very strange thing happened. The elder Bridgerton let out all the air he seemed to have held in for years, whispered something like, "Thank you, my God," and looked gratefully up at the sky. Then he stood up and poured himself a drink, the most expensive kind, it should be noted, clinking his glass and welcoming him into the family. He had married off his 4 sisters and was free of them. He would be free at last. Gareth found the situation suspiciously easy, given Anthony's reputation, but given his reaction, it didn't seem unusual for the Viscount to have a priest brought in and marry them on the spot. It seemed to Gareth that the man was out of his mind. Only a few minutes later, he warned her to think carefully about her decision, because Hyacinth was not an easy woman, and she should take that into account. He would not tell his younger sister about the conversation until Gareth had proposed to her, so she would have a chance to think it over and regret it if she chose to do so. This annoyed him, and he prepared a scathing reply to his future brother-in-law, who then surprised him by letting him know that he knew of his troubled relationship with his father, and that if he married Hyacinth, he would become part of the Bridgerton family with all that entailed, for better or worse. Anthony then asked if Lord St. Clair might be a problem for Hyacinth once they were married, and Gareth replied that it was likely. This made him realize that he had to hurry and marry Hyacinth as soon as possible, for if her father decided to tell him the truth about his origins, it was likely that Anthony or Lady Bridgerton herself would want to call off the wedding. No one in their right mind would allow a well-born girl to marry a bastard. So he went straight to his grandmother's house, where he knew he would find Hyacinth, for it was Tuesday. He tried to be alone with her, but the stubborn Lady Danbury would not allow it. So, with no other alternative, he knelt before her and asked, "Will you do me the very great honor of being my wife?" And for the first time in the history of the Bridgerton family, it seemed that someone had succeeded in leaving Hyacinth speechless. Lady Danbury tried to answer for her, but the girl eventually said yes, causing Lady Danbury to withdraw. She then asked Gareth why he had decided to ask her to marry him, but he did not answer, except to leave a trail of kisses along her arm, admiring her beauty. Within 3 weeks, all London knew that Hyacinth and Gareth were engaged, and he was now a privileged member of the Bridgerton family. But he feared for his father and what he might do to embarrass him in front of his fiancée. So he decided to take Hyacinth's hand in marriage, binding her irrevocably. After all, it was not as if he had no intention of marrying her, and besides, they had shared little more than kisses for the past few weeks. So he slipped into her room that night and made no effort to seduce her, for they had long shared the same intense desire for each other, and so they spent their first night together. They then went to St. Clair's house to continue their search for the diamonds. Once inside, they managed to find a book in the library written in Italian, the title of which was no more and no less than that of the previous note. Inside, they found another piece of paper written in a completely different language, but which at first glance did not appear to be Italian. But as they turned the corner to leave the house, Gareth passed his father, while Hyacinth remained in the shadows. This would undoubtedly be a test of Gareth's self-control. Knowing that she was hidden away listening to everything, he had to be careful what he said. However, something unexpected happened. His father mocked him, telling him that he had not thought him capable of committing himself to Hyacinth, and continued to taunt him as he always did, but revealed something that had not occurred to Gareth. He was still legally betrothed to Mary Worshap. Her father had signed the betrothal papers years before, so he could not marry Hyacinth until that betrothal was dissolved, or the marriage would be null and void. As soon as the man was gone, Gareth turned the corner to look for Hyacinth, but he did not find her. She was gone. She had overheard the conversation and must have been furious. He then ran to the Bridgerton house and slipped into her room, as he had done earlier in the evening. There, he tried to give her an explanation about his engagement to Mary, but found that Hyacinth was really upset. Not about that, but about the fact that she thought he had asked her to marry him just to prove something to her father. She then asked him again why he had asked her to marry him, and Gareth again did not know what to say. He loved her. Of course, he loved her. He wanted her with all his might, and he liked her as much as his grandmother liked her. And he knew very well that he could never marry a woman of whom Lady Danbury did not approve. But when he asked himself why he had asked her to marry him, he had no definite answer, only several little reasons which he did not know how to put into words. This annoyed Hyacinth, who asked him to leave. 3 days went by without them speaking or seeing each other. Gareth's absence caught Violet's attention, as it was unusual for an engaged couple not to want to be together all the time. So she asked her daughter if something was wrong between them. Hyacinth replied that everything was fine, but the truth was that she was not good at hiding her feelings, especially from her mother, the person who knew her best. So, unable to hide her discomfort, she simply told her that they had had a fight. Violet asked her if she wanted to break off the engagement, and she did not hesitate to say no. Although Gareth had seduced her by taking her virginity to make her feel tied to him, she loved him and genuinely wanted to marry him no matter what. Her mother, who had little idea of what was going on, decided to give her advice based on what she knew of her daughter and told her to be gentle with him and help him. And so Hyacinth decided to forgive him, and in doing so, she thought, feeling bold, that she would be the one to use her seductive skills. She then made her way to Gareth's house and surprised him in his office, using the search for the diamonds as an excuse. Although in reality, she had made progress. As with Colin's help, she had discovered that the last note they had found was written in Slovenian. So now they would have to find someone to translate it, as she was convinced that this was the last clue that would lead them to the exact location of the diamonds. After a lively discussion on the subject, Hyacinth decided to press her question. Why had he asked her to marry him? Gareth still didn't know what to say, so he thought for a minute and realized that he was actually in love. He had loved her, perhaps for some time, though he wasn't ready to admit it, but he wasn't ready to tell her yet, so he decided that in return, he would tell her the truth about his origins and the identity of his father. So he told her, and to his surprise, her reaction was incredibly normal. Hyacinth admitted that, to tell the truth, it was a relief that her sons would not carry Lord St. Clair's blood, though they would carry his title, as it was practical, and that they would simply have to keep the secret between them. He then asked her if she did not wish to break off the engagement, and she replied that she did not at all. She still wanted to marry him, and her family would not object, for it was nothing new for one of the Bridgertons to marry out of wedlock. And she told him of the case of Benedict's wife, Sophie, who was the illegitimate daughter of the Earl of Peenwood. Besides, he was not illegitimate, for his father had acknowledged it, so they could live quietly in London, and she was sure Lord St. Clair would have no objection. He himself must have known that if he revealed the truth, he would look like a cuckold. This amused Gareth, but she also forced herself to remind him that marrying him would mean living a simple life without any luxuries, for she would have no titles until her father died, and when that happened, she would inherit nothing but debts, but she did not care about any of that, and she let him know it. Then he decided to give her a present, something he had made himself. He handed her a sheet of paper, a portrait of Hyacinth that he had painted himself, and on it he saw the girl with a beautiful diamond bracelet that he would have wanted to give her if he had been able to. He explained that he had been inspired by a story he used to tell her about a princess and a diamond bracelet. He had also made another sketch showing the bracelet in more detail, which he had drawn based on his grandmother's description. Hyacinth felt happy, grateful, and touched, and had a strong urge to tell him that she loved him, but for some reason that even she did not understand. She decided to remain silent, for it was not yet the time. The following Tuesday came, and as every week Hyacinth found herself at Lady Danbury's, but the old lady fell asleep while she was reading to her, so she took the opportunity to continue translating Granny St. Clair's diary. She found that she had written about the birth of George, Gareth's older brother, so if she jumped forward a few years, she would probably find something about the birth of her fiancé, and hopefully the identity of his real father. Isabella St. Clair did not seem to think much of her son. He clearly loved him, but he was aware that he had been brought up by his father in his own image, so he treated her with as much indifference as he did Annie, his wife and mother of his children. So, after kissing Lady Danbury and reminding her that she was soon to be his grandmother, she left the place in search of Gareth. She found him at her house, about to leave for St. Clair's in search of the diamonds, but when he saw her, he was furious. How could this woman be so reckless as to wander the streets of London alone in the middle of the night? She had done it the day they met her father, but now she had no excuse. Didn't Hyacinth have any common sense? He forced her in, and after surprising her with his behavior, confessed that he loved her and would do whatever he had to do to protect her from his desperate urges that would put her in danger, even if it meant tying her to the bed. This touched Hyacinth, who could not help but reply that she loved him too, but there was something else she had to tell him, something perhaps just as important. She had discovered who his father was. Gareth was the son of Edward St. Clair, Lord St. Clair's brother. Isabella, Gareth's grandmother, had written this in her diary. For during the time the boy was conceived, his supposed father had been away on a journey, while Edward had spent the season in this house with Annie, Gareth's mother. Besides, Gareth was too much like the St. Clairs to be a bastard. Lord St. Clair didn't know, and apparently the only one who knew the truth and wasn't involved was Isabella. Gareth then remembered his uncle, who he now knew was actually his father, and how he had treated him when he was a boy. How he had given him the love his father had never deigned to give him, taught him to ride a horse, and given him a puppy for his birthday. It all made sense now. It was an important and momentous revelation, but it didn't stop them rolling around on the carpet in Gareth's office. The wedding was 6 weeks away, but at that moment they decided to bring it forward to the following week. Hyacinth then persuaded Gareth to go and look for the diamonds, but again, they did not find them. As they left the house, however, they ran into Lord St. Clair again, and it was then that Gareth revealed to him the truth, that he was his brother's son. The news seemed to take him by surprise, but he simply told him to see that he married Hyacinth, for he would need her dowry, and then withdrew, disappearing into the house. For some strange reason that Hyacinth did not understand, being free of that secret had made Gareth happier than he had thought, and excited by what had just happened. He fell to his knees and asked her to marry him, but this time it would be a proposal for the right reasons. He loved her. He wanted her. He wanted to spend his life with her and make a family with her, knowing that he was the luckiest man in London to have her as his wife. 4 days after that night, Gareth visited his former fiancé's father, who had no problem breaking off the engagement as he had never considered it legitimate, especially after hearing that Lady Bridgerton had promised to look after his 2 youngest daughters for the next season. On the other hand, it was impossible to bring the wedding forward, so they had to wait 2 months before being married in a large and pompous ceremony. 11 months after the wedding, Hyacinth gave birth to their first child, whom they named George. 2 years later, they were blessed with a daughter, whom they named Isabella. 4 years later, Lord St. Clair fell from his horse while hunting and died instantly. Gareth took the title and his property, and the family moved to the Clair house. 6 years passed, and Hyacinth was still relentless in her search for diamonds, which, it should be noted, had yet to bear fruit. 10-year-old Isabella St. Clair sat in her nursery doing her French homework. She had decided she wanted to learn the language and would practice with her governess after her lessons. Her mother always helped her, although Isabella enjoyed making her translate science books where she would get stuck translating scientific terms even when she pretended to know them. Isabella loved her mother, no doubt, and wanted to be like her when she grew up, but she also admired her great-grandmother Danbury, whom she hoped to be like when she reached her age. She loved her father too, of course, but with him it was different because he was a man. Impatiently waiting for her mother to appear on the scene, Isabella made her way to the children's bathroom, a small room with beautiful tiles adorning the walls. Strangely enough, it was her favorite room in the whole house, and if it had been big enough, she would have moved into it in a heartbeat. After using the potty and washing her hands, Isabella prepared to leave, but something caught her eye. One of the tiles closest to the floor had a crack in it that had managed to escape the family's notice. She bent down, and after a few taps on the crack, managed to pull out a small velvet pouch containing a necklace and a diamond bracelet. But the girl, as clever and eccentric as her mother, and unaware of the tireless search for the treasure, decided to leave them where she had found them, without saying a word. Second epilogue. Was the ending of For a Kiss unfair? Our beloved author, Julia Quinn, had thought it more than appropriate that Hyacinth should have a daughter just like her. And of course, As her and Gareth's daughter, the obvious decision on finding the diamonds should have been to hide them, but readers didn't think so. So Julia decided to write this second epilogue to do justice to Hyacinth's more than 10 years of searching for what she was looking for. That day, Isabella was with her mother in the dressmakers trying on different gowns for the next season. She had made her debut last year but had yet to find a husband, and Hyacinth was beginning to regret the scolding her mother had given her when she was her daughter's age, for now, she was the one in the other role. Gareth, for his part, had managed to get out of the debt he had inherited from his father, or uncle, he never knew what to call him, with the help of Hyacinth's dowry and various investments made with it, and the family was now in a fairly respectable position. George was finishing his studies at Cambridge. While Isabella was likely to find a husband very soon, things could not be better. Hyacinth returned home that evening, impatient to continue her search for the diamonds, and had her husband move a huge bathtub in one of the bathrooms to search the floor for diamonds, but this attempt was also in vain. What they didn't know was that Isabella was listening to them from the other side of the door, discovering for the first time that her parents had been searching for years for what she had decided to hide in a secret drawer in her wardrobe, inherited from her late great-grandmother, Isabella. She didn't even know why she had decided not to show it to anyone, not even to use it. Maybe she just liked the idea of having a secret, something only she knew about. Of course, if her mother had decided to tell her, she would have given them to her immediately. Hyacinth, on the other hand, had decided not to tell her, because knowing her daughter, she would end up being just as obsessed with finding those diamonds as she was. A year later, Hyacinth was lying on the floor of the nursery washroom, repeating her quest. There were good days, even weeks, when she would forget about the diamonds, but then something would remind her and she would resume her quest. She had checked every bathroom in the house, including the maid's, leaving the children's bathroom last. That afternoon, she noticed for the first time a small crack in one of the tiles, anxiously opened it with a chisel, and called Gareth with joy and excitement when she discovered that she had finally found the diamonds, while Isabella, who was in her room just below the nursery, smiled as she heard her mother's cries of delight. What other character would you like us to make a video about on this channel? Let me know in the comments. Remember, if you like these videos, you can support us by liking and subscribing. See you next time.